know. Bittersweet to a brand new future. Eyes on the road. Don't carry burdens no one uses. Don't even measure the time. Clear pages, worn out verses. Right away from here. Free from the mold. Pack up the smiles and warm embraces. Leave behind the cold. You got away with your funny phrases and the light in your eyes. Build a love into empty spaces. Love is all around. Light shines in strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. Love is all around. Life moves in strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. It's where you are. Wipe away your tears. Reach for the road. Lift yourself to a new horizon. Breathe in the hold. Troubles come like a dime for the dozen. Who can answer why? We don't wait for the shortcut. We just fly. Love is all around. Light shines in the strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. Love is all around. Life moves in strangest places. Love is all around. It's where you are. It's where you are.
Welcome, everyone, to the 10th podcast of Black and White Let's Talk. Tonight, we are going to have a conversation among Pastor Robert, Dan, and myself about embracing transitions. All three of us are going through some great changes in our lives, and we are going to have a conversation about that. How do we cope? What does God say about change in our lives? What can we hang on to when we go through some changes, whether they're welcomed or not? Change can be a challenge, but the one constant we have is that change is life. So welcome, Pastor Robert. Welcome, Dan. And I always...
Hello, good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, and I have to mention that song. Just tell us what you just said about that song. Love is all around.
Oh, I think it's a great song. I love it. I've gotten addicted to it. And I think that a year from now, when as we're doing this podcast, people are going to hear that song, and wherever they are in their house, they're going to play, oh, Black and White's on, Black and White's on. And I love the song, kind of like I used to love the theme music to the Cosby Show and to all those shows that were on in the 80s. I loved all the theme songs. What was the one about the bar? What was Cheers?
Oh, right. Those are so catchy. Well, what's so cool about this song is that the band members they're from Wichita. Most of them are from Wichita Public Schools. We have the drummer, who's a great journalist in Wichita. So that's what's really cool. So they've given us permission to use it. But the other thing that's so cool about it, it just fits perfectly the theme of what we're trying to be about. Love truly is all around. It shows up in strange places, but we can count on it being there. Love is, and love is all around. So tonight, I have two quotes to set the tone for this conversation. We must be willing to get rid of the life we've planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. The old skin has to be shed before the new one can come. And that's by Joseph Campbell. What would life be if we had no courage to attempt anything? That's by Vincent van Gogh. So I can attest, I believe the three of us are courageous people because we are just constantly in a state of growth, exploration, and change. And I just really wanted to start with Pastor Robert because I think most everyone knows that you're making a big transition from St. Mark, who you've served so well in Wichita. You have been such an important figure, both of heart, the way you go about being, and just your presence here has been very, it's just been so impactful. But a new journey, and just going up the road a bit. So tell us all about the change in your life, how you are embracing it, how you're doing with it, the challenges, the good, the harder things about it, and just talk to us about that. And you're muted, so I'll remind you to.
So there we go.
There we go.
So I am making a change. Those of you that know that keep up with what's going on with our Black and White podcast, also other stuff that St. Mark is doing separate from this. You all know that we're United Methodists, and in the United Methodist Church, we operate in what is called the itinerant system, which means they move pastors around. I know in some cases, unique particular cases, pastors are allowed to stay longer for a long time, 15, 20 years, but for the most part, I would say 95% of United Methodist pastors move around. Some move around a lot. I have not moved around a lot, not as much as most United Methodist pastors move, but I've moved some. Most of my moves have been big moves. So going from small church, transitional church that I was leading while I was still in seminary, to going to a mega church, which at that time was the largest Methodist church in the world, Windsor Village. And then I went from that to starting a new church where I went from that where you got plenty of money, you got all resources, everything is there for you, you got a staff of a couple of hundred people. I went from that to starting a new church where we literally had to set church up every Sunday. We literally had to, so church began at 10. We had to get there at 8 to set up the chairs, to set up the stage, to set up the music, to set up the mics. Then after worship was over, we break everything down. And we did that for 7 years. It was a wonderful experience. And then I left there and went to serve a predominantly white church in College Station, Texas. So I was a Black pastor, was the first African-American pastor to serve a predominantly white church in South Central Texas, College Station, Texas, which is where Texas A&M is. Was there for a year and a half. That was my shortest tenure, because a year and a half into that, I got this amazing call to come to St. Mark, which is one of the flagship churches in our denomination. So my wife and I, Linda and I, left Texas and moved to Kansas, made that major transition. If you think anyone who thinks that was easy should talk to my daughter, who was a junior in high school at the time. She hated us for a while. Of course, she got over it and ended up loving Wichita. And now we're headed to Resurrection, which for the second time in my ministry, I will serve at what is the largest United Methodist church in the nation, if not the world. Now, when we say in the world, we're excluding Korean United Methodist churches, right? Where those churches number in the hundreds of thousands. There are some churches, United Methodist churches in Asia, that have hundreds, but in terms of the nation, the country, Resurrection is the largest, and so it's a predominantly Anglo congregation. So that's going to be a major move. So so we're in transition again. What I've come to realize, you were so right. My vision for myself and my ministry was that I was going to be like all of my heroes in ministry, Kirby John Caldwell, many others, Tyrone Gordon, people who went and kind of either they started a church or they took a church that was had basically died out and grew it, and they stayed there for all of their ministry. And so that's what I thought, Dan, that I'm this gifted preacher. And man, when I get somewhere, the church is going to grow like wildfire and I'll be there forever. And that hasn't been the case. I've been more like an apostle who's moved around to start new things or to rebirth things or to turn around things. That's been my ministry. So Jen, as you, in your quote, we have our plans and then God has other plans, right? So what I've learned to do is embrace change and to interchange with the understanding that more change is coming. So when I came to St. Mark, I already had that wisdom. So my first presentation at St. Mark, I started talking about finding our next pastor, next young adult pastor. We wanted that St. Mark needed to do that. And that my job was to help us get to a place of health so that we could be ready to bring on the next pastor, young adult person who would move the church forward. That hasn't quite worked out like I wanted it to, but my point in that is that what I've learned to do with change is to enter into transitions, into change, already planning for the next change, because that's the only constant. That's the only constant.
Wow. So I had a couple questions then. In your new position, are you going to be preaching like you do here in Wichita? Or is it, I know it's a huge staff up there. So what is going to be your role in the church? And then I'll have some other questions, but I was wondering what you're going to be doing there.
Absolutely. So I will not be preaching every weekend. Resurrection senior pastor is Adam Hamilton, and he preaches. There are 6 campuses there. Their plan is they have 10, by the way, but there are 6 campuses, and he preaches. He records his messages, and they basically broadcast those to all the services. So I will function in every way as a lead pastor at that campus, except for preaching every weekend. I'm very excited about that, to be honest with you, because I've been having to preach every weekend for over 25 years. And the creativity that it takes, the energy that it takes to do that week in, week out.
Yep.
I've had to neglect other things, and God's calling me to do more writing, more podcasting,
right,
more community building. And so now I get to turn more of my creative energy towards these other things. And then participate in a healthy community where the preaching load is carried by someone else. So that's what that will look like. Yes.
I am doing a little thing I think we told you called Dan in the Vineyard. Mm-hmm. The other night I took as an example a vine that had 2 different truths to be taught out of it. In other words, when Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches, if you abide in me and I abide in you, you'll bear much fruit, but without me, you can do nothing. But in the same interesting way, if you look at a vine, it will throw off a very productive branch and produce a lot of fruit. So then the vine maker or the master or the owner of the vineyard goes in every year and prunes that back to where it just is that far away from the vine, so that then it will have to throw off new life, new shoots, and it's only in a grape plant, only where you get fruit is on a new shoot. The old stuff doesn't bear fruit. And so I liken our lives to being pruned back. In a spiritual sense, we are all being pruned throughout our life. And if we don't want to get pruned, I guess we don't have to, but because we can choose, I think, to a large degree, when the pruning process comes up, we can either engage it, or the change process, we can either engage it, or we can say, I don't think so. I don't want to go there. And the whole future changes and the fruit changes as a result of that. And so I just think we're all being pruned. Janet, I know, is going through some major changes. So, Janet, tell us about what's going on for you, because I know there's some big changes going on in your life.
Well, I have been quite committed to insanity, maybe for a long time, with making changes in schools, Wichita Public Schools, but not only Wichita. I do some trainings with the Kansas Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution across the state. And what we've really been trying to work on is shifting the paradigm. People don't realize what a punishing, punitive formula that we have been following forever in schools, and then trying to shift that from a top-down bureaucracy where the leader is the dictator, the leader is responsible for everything. So that shift into a restorative approach where it's about voice, belonging, inclusion, and agency. And the basic premise is people are just going to be happier, more cooperative, more collaborative when those with influence and those with authority do things with rather than to, not at all or for. That with, and what does with mean? And I have given really a lifetime to this work, and particularly focused on Wichita Public Schools. Wichita Public Schools has contracted the last 4 years with the International Institute of Restorative Practices, where my colleague who's been on the podcast, Rob Simon, and I received training. And what was the change about that was hard is that we really want to keep this work with fidelity. And fidelity means we let go of control as leaders, and we really value the input of those impacted the most by the decisions that we're making. And so with the IRP, I think, it was a great move in that they're a large organization, a large corporation that could train 6,000 people in the district. But what that meant was change in my role and just letting go of the restorative practices within the system. I think part of my heartbreak, I think people are very well intended, but as restorative practices catches steam all across the globe and in the United States with school districts, how are we going to continue what started with good intentions as we move forward? How's it not going to become monetized? Dan, you were telling me this new word I've heard recently, corporatized. That's kind of like a new word people are using, where you take something that's meant to be so relational, so heart to heart, relationships, and then you take it and bring it in a more massive level where people can give lip service to it and they may not really even understand it, because restorative practices is really a reflection of the heart. It starts with me and my willingness to change. So anyway, I've just decided, I love my work. It has been a fabulous journey. I have met the most fantastic people in Wichita Public Schools for sure. Some of the most gifted and talented people I could ever know. But I just woke up one morning and said, it really wasn't planned. It was very quick, but I just thought I need to just step aside, let new folks step in. I know some people are kind of freaked out, but they're just going to have to get their feet wet, just like Rob and I did. And you only learn by doing, and you can't just rely on other people. You got to jump in and do it. So I am going to rewire. I'm not calling it retiring, because I have this expertise and experience with really promoting collaboration and peacemaking and relationships among teams and among a community. So I just need to figure out where the next place is, and I'm excited about it. But it is change. It is significant change. So that's where it's at for me. And Dan, I know you're going through just a whole lot.
Yeah, and your life, the longer you live, I think it gets even better because we've got more experience, and I think as I get older anyway, the more thankful I am that I get to live as long as I've lived. Unfortunately, I've lost many dear friends through the years. And so as I enter into my 7th decade of engagement with life, I am more excited than ever before about possibilities that are going to open up working with you, Robert and Janet, the possibilities that we have down the road to enjoy life, but make a difference in others' lives. My own life, I was a Jesus freak and touched when I was 19 years old in a very special way. And I've more than once in my life just said, here I am, Lord, send me whatever you want me to do. So I've sort of tried to be engaged in his work. And I found myself in various different things through the years, some of which were more productive than others. But nevertheless, I really don't regret any of it. It's been all such an amazing journey. And I'm considering opening this workshop called The Journey, because I think it would be a really interesting thing to bring people together and talk about the journey that we have and the problems we engage, whether it's in our marriages or in our work relationships, or whether it's with our families, how we can become better people, how we can become more like him, who we are called to be like. And so whether we do workshops, podcasts, or today I had the joy of working with a beautiful young lady, Susanna, out at the Vineyard, and I got to teach her how to wash windows with a squeegee and a mop. It's because she was trying to do it with a towel and some spray on the window, and it wasn't getting very far. There were all kinds of fly specks all over the place, and it was smeared. I said, you just don't know quite how to wash windows. So I actually showed her how to wash windows. And actually, as I went and said, this is it, man. It doesn't get any better than working with a young lady. And then there's a young guy out there I get to work with. And so I get to engage in hopefully a mentor relationship with them and give something of my life to them that they can take with them in the future in a positive way. And for me, the latest thing we did was Prairie Hill Vineyard, which took me 20 years basically from the time we moved back to Wichita to where now it's running itself as a business. And I don't want to quit working with them, but I have somebody running the business. And so I have more time now to do things outside of staying on the farm every day and having to stay focused on that business. And so the idea of doing the podcast to me is to reach more people, to build a community, sort of a church without walls, because we're all part of a spiritual body that transcends walls, transcends time, for that matter. It's a body of people that have engaged their walk with the Father in trying to become all that he's made us to be and understand who we are to be and how we are to be with each other. And that to me is like, wow, what and this whole thing of what Jan's talking about, people's hearts. How do we then get people to literally shift their heart? Because if all God looks at is our heart, everything I do on the outside doesn't amount to a hill of beans. It's like, where am I coming from? And so if I do anything in my life here with all of us working together, that's my sincere prayer, is that we can somehow touch people's hearts in a way that they open up and uncover the hurt areas and engage the one that can heal them. And we can help heal each other by that relationship. And so that's sort of, I know, so rosy pie in the sky. Oh, can life really be that wonderful? I think we have to engage that. I mean, other than that, you basically go back into the bedroom and watch, bad TV all night long. And I really don't want to do that.
Well, so Pastor, what I heard you say that I think is so important is, rather than railing against change, you've learned over time to lean into it. What gives you the strength to do that? Where does the strength to lean into change come from for you? You're muted.
You would think that I would by now. So for me, so number one, I've started embracing change faster and quick. It's kind of building the expectation for change into my life because change is so painful for me. Okay, so I'm a person who tends to get stuck in ruts, who can be very stubborn, who likes comfort and convenience of familiarity. And then I love deeply, like every church I've served, it was like I'm willing to die for this place, right? When I was at Windsor, it was like I would die. I'm ready to die for Windsor. When I did the new church, man, I'm ready, so that I literally had to be pulled away from that. And so that's so painful, that what I've learned to do is just to understand that when the change happens, this won't last forever. What's interesting about that is that taking that pain and learning how to deal with it. That my wife is probably even more so. Linda is probably even more so resistant to change. Like she's a type A personality. She likes control. She likes clarity. She likes things to be set forth with a clear. And so any impromptu stuff, stuff that's unstructured, she just doesn't like it. But as we're headed to Kansas City, even Linda is saying like, okay, let's get there for this first house, for example. We don't know what we're going to do but we're going to be in this house for a year. Yes. But what we're going to do after that, we don't know. How long are we going to be at Resurrection? Like, we haven't some anticipation, but we don't know. So we're entering into this new situation with change, but that's born out of going through the painful experience of having to let go and move on. So it's born of pain, but it's also born of community. I'm learning that one of the best way, if you don't like change, for people that are listening who don't like change, or change is very difficult for you, to do change in community. Don't isolate. Strengthen current relationships. Build new friendships. And do change with people in community with others. That's always very helpful. And then the other thing is just realizing that I can't have the life that I want for myself. Is this realization that I cannot have the life that I want for myself and for my family and for my loved ones unless I'm willing to change. So, for example, when you guys invited us out the first time to the vineyard for dinner, for fellowship, Linda and I had a routine, and it's set. I mean, we've been doing this routine, Dan, for 2,000 years. We go to worship, I preach hard, we go to lunch, and we go home and we cry and we crash. Right? And we wake up about 6 o'clock, and then we start getting ready for the week. And it is hard to pull us out of that routine. So when you all invited us, we were like, man, that sounds so good. And the only reason we were like hesitant was this like that. But what do I do about my nap? It's gonna mess up our Sunday routine. But then at the same time, we were like, but we like these people. Like and we haven't even really gotten to know them, but and this is an opportunity for us to build a new friendship. So, but the only way to enjoy this blessing of a new friendship with these people the only way to enjoy that is you got to do something different. You got to change. And so I've started, I just kind of view change that way, that whenever change feels hard, I say, but what's on the other side of it that I really want? And what's holding me back from making that change, the change? And usually it's something very shallow, like a Sunday nap.
Well, yeah, change is the only constant thing.
Yeah.
And I think every day that's the navigation of change, is walking in faith.
Yes.
I was talking to Jan about the workshop. I mean, ideas, there's hope for the future. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. In this case, you have hope for the relationship that you have in the future up there and the difference you can make. Mm-hmm. But the faith is that you can walk through all of the challenges that you're going to have to walk through in order to reach that goal.
Mhm.
And in the middle of it, we have to walk in love in order for all of that to come together into the fullness of what God would have it to be.
Yeah.
And so there is hope, there's faith, and there's love. And those are such pillars of our very existence. And I'd say this, whether you're Christian or not Christian, I mean, these are principles that are in life for everybody. And the whole idea is that I'm back to producing fruit, because if you don't have a new shoot, you don't get any new fruit. And that fruit is the purpose of our lives, is to produce good fruit. And love, joy, peace, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, meekness, patience, self-control, which is one I'm still working on. And so I'm all working on all of them, but at some point, seeing that fruit come into existence as a result of the life that you're living, that I think for all of us, at least if I know your heart, is that the purpose of your life is to affect others in such a way that there may be good fruit. And so
Excellent. Wow, that's an excellent answer. That's an excellent answer. I mean, and it's biblical, but as you said, but those truths are true for people even if they aren't Christians.
Yeah.
Faith, hope, and love.
Janet's work ties all those principles together in a different language, but there's hope, there's faith that you're going to get, and then there's love, which is really the compassion of understanding how we need to hear one another so that we can understand each other, versus you need to change so that you're like me, because I got it all together. And all of those concepts of transformation, because change is very closely linked to transformation. And Pete Buttigieg, I was reading something he said today about his own faith walk, and how you meet God in the journey.
Yes.
As Paul did, rather abruptly on the road to Damascus or whatever. And as the two men did that talked to Jesus on the road to Emmaus. And so there are lots of, in our journey, who is the one, there's lots of times God meets us in the journey. And so for me, having that conversation with you, Robert, is I love being able to talk to you and not to be judged about my views, and likewise back and forth.
Yeah.
And to learn from each other. Yeah. I'm honored to be able to be on these podcasts with you. I really am.
I think that's such a brilliant answer. Jen, if I can just kind of I just think so, because when change comes, it provides us, it's a source of hope, because we all want to get, if we're alive and we're experiencing some kind of vitality, we have hopes for something better, for a better life, for if not for ourselves, for our children or for our friends or our family. So there's hope. So change, the power to change comes from this hope that gets inspired by the possibility of change. But then the faith that somehow, faith in ourselves and faith in God or faith in others, that things are somehow going to work out even though we can't see them now. And then the love just grounds us in the understanding that, okay, wherever I'm going, whatever I end up doing, however this works out, that I want to make sure that I'm loving people, meaning that I'm being a blessing to, if we in Christian, or that I'm serving others, that I'm helping to make other people's lives better. And that's kind of my purpose in life. And so you walk through that. I just think that was a brilliant answer. Brilliant answer. If I want to say, so it's interesting. I was telling someone that I grew up in the Deep South. I lived in the Southwest, and I live in the Midwest. All three of those places are places that tornadoes happen. And then, of course, in the Deep South, you have the hurricanes as well, but you have tornadoes. And I was telling them that I'm 57 and I've never seen a tornado. But I have nightmares about them. And in my nightmares, it's always that I'm in a place where there are no trees, there are no buildings. It's just open land, and there's nothing there but me and the tornado. And it comes up suddenly. And the fear that that arouses in me. And so, but what I gain from that is this: I think that's there's a kind of wisdom that comes from our encounters with tornadoes, because this frightening thing appears out of nowhere. And what makes it so frightening is that it can radically change everything
Right.
in a split second, right?
Yes.
And so that's, I think change feels that way for us sometimes. Sometimes we kind of know it's coming, we can plan for it, but sometimes change just happens and it's frightening. But if we, with faith, hope that whatever, we'll get through this somehow, the hope that we'll get through it, and the faith in ourselves and God, and then learning to, and if we keep loving people and we let people love us, which is probably more for most of us, that's probably the biggest thing, is not just loving, but letting people love us with all of our rejection wounds, Jan, that we all carry these rejection wounds. And this, I'd rather be alone because I don't want to, afraid to trust again, afraid to love again. But if we allow people to love us, that we can embrace change and our lives can continue to grow and flourish. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, what shaped me at a very young age, I think I've mentioned before that my parents were very, very young, and we were living in one big house with my grandmother and grandfather, and I was the baby of the family. And my grandmother, I called her mother, and she functioned as my mother. I've had conversations with my mother, my mother, rather, my grandmother, about this, and she we couldn't talk about it when I was younger, but we've talked about it now. She's 91, and we've had some conversations about it. But I was so attached to my grandmother because she was my nurturer, my caretaker. And then when I was 6 years old, she got very, very sick with ovarian cancer. And that in itself is a story, because in those days we didn't talk about illness and grief, and we were Christian Scientists. And so she didn't get the kind of health support to alleviate pain and all that kind of stuff. So the way she died was traumatic, that she died, that was traumatic. And that was a big, huge change in my life. That was, for me, it was catastrophic. And it changed my life forever. So it's like these things that happen that, I just can't spend the energy on why. It's like, okay, God, I don't know why. I don't know why you allowed this to happen, but I do know you're going to walk with me to see me through this. And I think what compounded the trauma of all that is I didn't have a community. I didn't have people. I was just this quiet little girl. People didn't really pay attention much, especially then, of what death and trauma does to children. And so the isolation is what was tough. So I think some real key points that you brought up is, we're not intended to suffer alone. We're not intended to suffer alone.
That's
but
right.
In human nature, it is our human nature to cover up, to hide, to just insulate, to run away, when the opposite of what we need are caring, nurturing people in our circle in a community. And that is the only way through some of these sufferings of change that we're going to go through. It's about the relationships, and to the trust and faith that in these millions of imperfections that we deal with, God has a perfect plan.
Yes, the community piece. I know, as I'm preparing to go to Resurrection, and we started having these conversations months ago, and then we got to the place of, okay, this is going to happen. Then we got to the place of making the announcements, and then that's been a couple of months now, and now I'm waiting for July to get here and transitioning. And every now and then I'll get a text message from one of the staff people who are already there. And they'll say, "Hey, Robert, just thinking about you, praying for you, and can't wait for you to get here." And I can't tell you how encouraging that is, Jan. Dan. Like that, like how it lifts me. because I'm in this place, and I'm this kind of in between place where in part of me feels like I'm letting St. Mark down, or that I'm disappointing people, or that I didn't complete certain tasks, or that we didn't get certain things done. And then part of me is feeling like, are these other people going to really embrace me? They said that they want me, but do they really want me? Are they going to really like me? Are they going to embrace? And that limbo, and to get those messages, which is community, right? That's community and love, Dan. That's community. It's an expression of love to just say, hey, Robert, thinking about you. And I know that's got to be tough to go through this transition, but just know that you're on my prayer list. I'm praying for you every day. And let me know if let me know if there's anything I can do to help with your transition. And if you're in Linda over in this area, let us know, because we don't have to wait till July. We love to take you guys out to dinner, that kind of thing. And it's so encouraging. So Jan, yes. And I remember my father who passed in December. And my dad was such a hard worker and tried to live such a life of integrity. My dad had such a sense of obligation that he neglected himself, because he felt like he had to keep his word to every commitment he made to every person. If somebody expected him to be somewhere, he just felt like he had to be there, and then he'd be down on himself. He battled mild depression, but so much of it was that he tried to do it alone, Dan. He had other guys, younger men who loved and respected him, and they come out to the house and just want to hang out with my dad. And my dad would never stop working. He talked to him, but he talked to him as he worked, which kind of made people feel like, okay, Mr. Robert's busy, right? Like he doesn't really. And I just wish that my dad would have. My one thing that we don't live with regrets. I know people say we don't, but the one thing that I wish for my dad is that he would have allowed, as he loved people and as he was was committed to helping people, that he would have let people love him, and that he would have enjoyed community. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I wish I'd have got to know your dad. I wish I'd have got to know Janet's dad too. So we have what we have now. What comes up as I think about your transformation is possibilities through transformation written all over the walls in your church.
Yep. Yep.
And I think the changes that we're all going through are transformations in our lives to bring us into a closer, I want to be a butterfly. In other words, that's my goal, right? To be transformed into this beautiful creature that is all of what a butterfly represents. I love butterflies. We have some in Janet's backyard. They're floating around in this thing that we have. So the idea is we're moving into transformation. We're all developing new. My question for each of you is, and then we can just maybe go out and do what we want to do with the rest of the night. Robert, a year from now, what is your vision of what you would like to be doing and the difference you would like to have being made? And Jan, the same for you, and then I'll answer that as well.
So for me, in a year from now, I hope that I'm deeply engaged in the work of bringing people together and tearing down bridges, tearing down walls of isolation and alienation between people, and anger and hostility, and being a positive influence of helping to bring people together and helping people to appreciate the humanity of other people. And I hope I'm doing that at Resurrection among the people of Resurrection. But I also hope that I'm able to do that with the backing of Resurrection Church and their influence, bringing that message to bear on people and communities and cities everywhere. That's what I hope that I'll be deeply engaged in a year. Yeah. So bringing people together, doing restorative practice. Jan, when I say that could be offensive, because it's kind of like somebody who's a professional at something. They don't, they can be a little offended if a bootlegger, right?
That's hilarious. No, your heart is there. I mean, your heart is already there. That's why you've absorbed the concepts so quickly and so easily, because you resonate with the restorative work. I mean, the transformative work is what it is about. How do we show up in love with each other? How do we have conversations when it's tough? How do we have loving conversations when we don't agree? I mean, these things are who you are already. So but for me, where I see the most growth in my life right now, I've had a resistance to, I wouldn't say that I've ever lost my faith, ever. I mean, I always have had faith in the creator. There's a creator and a God bigger than me. And that's just not, I believe in science, but I believe in God as well. I have had such a resistance to identifying as a Christian because in my mind, it means racism. It means oppression. It means divisiveness. I mean, I've developed this resistance, but that's where the greatest growth is for me right now, as I'm letting my walls down, because I realize, okay, there are many, many people who love Jesus, who love Christianity, who are walking the walk. I just let all the dross really impact my resistance to jump in with faith. And so I know that's a big shift that's going on, where I am looking at scriptures. I actually looked at scriptures today about just that God promises to guard your heart and your mind. God promises to give you peace. God promises to comfort you in all your troubles. I mean, God promises to help you and strengthen you. I mean, I have been so far removed because I've just had this resistance, because it just has meant a certain thing to me. The prosperity gospel, all the stuff that's out there. And now I really feel this newness of openness. And so for me, a year from now, I want to have that even be more present in my life. And I it's already softening me. And I want to become, I want boundaries and healthy approaches to relationships, but I do desire a softness that's been missing because I've been so resistant. And so that's a big thing. Then the other thing is I want to continue to commit to the work of peace, and the work of relationships, and the work of healing, and where where God plants me with that, it's just cool, because I have full expectation that I will find my place again. And so
Wow.
That's where I'm at.
Wow.
That makes me think of the pastor at that church we went to, Chapel Hill, that he gave a little, I don't know if we told you this, Robert, he says that verse in Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not under your own understanding, in all the ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. That word trust in the Hebrew is more like, instead of somebody falling into a big pool of water off of a diving board, not knowing what's behind them, it's more like an outfielder standing there with your glove in one hand, ready to run on the next hand, knowing that there's going to be a play and you're going to be prepared for it. That's the kind of trust.
Wow.
That made a lot more sense to me than just totally, well, here I go, I guess I don't know where I'm going. It's part of that too, but but at the same time, we're in a place of preparation so we can take advantage of the possibilities that lie in front of us. That the grant we just received was a combination of preparation. What they say, luck is a combination of preparation and opportunity coming at the same time. And so it's just amazing how we have so much, all of us, to give. I think a year from now, I want to be sitting here in a different room with you, having the best time of our lives, developing meaningful relationships with people from all over the country, discussing matters that affect people's lives in a big ways, like big ways. We want to be salt, and we want to be light. We want to be healing. We don't want to be divisive. We don't want to be harmful. We don't want to rail on people. We want to be the exemplification of God's love in the world. And if I can do that, I'm a happy camper. I'd like to go out and prune the vines at the vineyard and mow the lawn occasionally, but that's about it. And I'm so excited for you, Robert, as you go on, because God has some, I believe, great balls he's going to hit you, you know what I mean? And you're going to get to play them. And Janet, I'm excited about the future with you building a workshop that could possibly really touch people's lives in a powerful way. So with that said, I know we all said we'd try to keep it somewhat in check tonight, and I don't want to be too controlling. One of the things today have to be, just I'll close. We went to this justice meeting, and the verse in Micah 6:8 where it says, "What does thy God require of you? But to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly." And everybody I know wants to put on a whole bunch more, or besides that, and yet do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. We could probably spend a month just discussing justice and mercy and what humility looks like. But that's what God's requiring of us. And I found myself today, as much as I want to have an open heart and not let my own judgments engage my interactions, I found myself today realizing that I brought up some stuff that I really didn't need to do. It wasn't the most loving thing to do. And so I was convicted all afternoon by my own lack of sensitivity to other people. Wow. It's so easy for me to roll over people and not recognize it. But when I don't want to be that way. And so I'm praying God will continue to soften me, Jan. I want to become combination of wise as serpents and harmless as a dove. Be like a little child. I want to be with a pure heart. And as we go into the future, I invite both of you to let me know if I'm not being that way. I really want to know.
And we can all be that way. That's the thing, is that everybody's that way. We can be very judgmental about how other people are that way and when it impacts us negatively. But we all do people that way. We all have people that we will attempt to overlook, to not be sensitive to their needs and concerns. And so I think what you're doing is a model life, Dan, that you're living publicly, to say, I'm in the midst of this transformation. It feels very uncomfortable at times. Sometimes I just don't see it, but I'm open to it. And you said something, Dan, it's so interesting how you came into St. Mark and you saw that all that stuff everywhere about possibilities and transformation. And that is the theme. That's St. Mark's. Those are St. Mark's theme words. But you talked about them in a way, one of the most profound ways that I've ever heard. We were together on a podcast and just kind of talking, just kind of impromptu. You said, if we aren't open to change, then we begin to restrict our possibilities. And I'm like, oh my God. And tonight we're talking about transitions, and we can resist them. But when we say no to the changes that life brings us, or that the universe brings us, or that God brings us, when we say no to those changes, we're literally shutting off possibilities for new life. Right. And for a better life, for a fuller life. Yeah. So that's just, you just nailed it. So I value you and appreciate the public way that you're living out your transformation. Some people are willing to change, but they want to do it privately so that they can publicly pretend to know everything. So they can publicly pretend to be perfect. But to live our lives out loud, in the sense when we're transforming, and to say that I don't know where I'm going to end up with this, and I'm not but I've kind of turned this over to God, and we'll see what happens. It's a very courageous thing to do.
Well, we're all doing that. So it's in his hands. And thank you so much, Janet. Thank you, Robert, for your friendship and your love. Good. Everybody who's still listening to this, we want you to know we appreciate your friendship, and we appreciate you listening in, and we appreciate your prayers, and we're all going to have fun in the year ahead. So with that said.
Yeah, I just would like to talk about just a couple things I'm thinking about. Is the one thing that has really struck me recently is there's no wisdom if there's no humility.
Wow.
And the only way that we are going to learn and grow is if we humble ourselves, listen to others, and just step back and step into the quietness of God's voice.
Wow.
And the other thing, in the midst of real challenges that people are going through, there's so much uncertainty. There's just, it just life feels so chaotic. I mean, even, the war that is before us, the wars, it's like, how can this be in this modern day society? I mean, there's just the violence, the shootings. But, if I get focused on that, my brain gets so clouded and I get so anxious. So just sitting quietly in the presence and being in the present moment. I mean, that's what's so beautiful about watching Dan in the vines, in the vineyard. I mean, he is so present right there doing that work. And it's such a spiritual thing to watch, because the only moment we truly have is in this very present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another thing I'm really working on, is just this quietness, shutting out the noise, the static on the radio, turn it off. And what is God truly saying in the present moment? Because I cannot control things. I don't understand some of the trauma that I've been through, that my children have been through. I don't understand a lot of things that have happened in our lives, but I do know that God has seen us through, and I can always count on that. And that's one benefit, a major benefit of being older, in that you see over your lifespan, that was really rough, but God got us through it. God got us through it. And that's just my final thoughts. So Pastor, do you have some final thoughts you'd like to share before we go?
If only if I can find this, because I wanted to share with you all a kind of a quick story about change, just maybe as an inspiration to folks. So when I was at the new church, and then, like I said, every place I've gone, I poured my heart into it. So I started that church. I was a lead pastor. It grew. It did well numerically, but we were never able to really get grounded financially. So we were always struggling financially. So on the one hand, there was always this money struggle, but on the other hand, the church was growing, and we were bringing new people into the kingdom, and new relationships were being born. It was a young adult church, and so we on Sunday mornings, it wasn't just typical church. We did poetry on Sunday mornings, and we did what they call spoken word, and we would have music guests, and we had jazz bands come in. It was just a really unique place. So when we were moving towards the close, because we got to a place where the conference was basically saying, Robert, you all have done well. We want to reward you. We want, but we think that the church isn't financially sustainable. And I just kept wanting to fight for it, kept wanting to give it another shot. And they called me one day and offered me to go to the church in College Station. And I said no. And then she says, well, and then I had my list. Before I called, I had my list of reasons as to why I didn't want to do it. Right. And so I went down that list, and everything that she mentioned, I mentioned. That district superintendent says, we've already talked about that. That's not a challenge. Because one of them was, Linda's not moving to College Station. Well, if Linda, she doesn't have to move, we're okay with that. Well, I don't even know if they want a black pastor. They've already said they know who you are. They know you came out of Windsor. They would love to have you. So it was like every objection, God had them prepared to just. So there was one other issue I had. And so she said, well, let me call them and ask. And while she was calling, the Lord started speaking to me. And the Lord told me, go to Aldersgate and enjoy Aldersgate. And what was very interesting, then, the Lord didn't say go and labor at Aldersgate. The Lord said go and enjoy Aldersgate. And that church really restored me and healed me so that I could come to St. Mark and be healthy enough to to come to a new city, meet new people. But I remember when as I was waiting for my district superintendent to call me back, and I was praying, and the Lord started speaking, and the Lord told me go. And I remember when I finished the conversation, I went home in the middle of the day and got in the tub, ran a tub of hot water. I would take hot baths and got in a tub of water. And out of nowhere, the words to this hymn came to me that I had heard this hymn sung at annual conference every year, but I never liked it, never sung along with them. Like, that's a corny old song, whatever. It was weird sounding song, but that song came to me out of nowhere. And so sitting in the tub, I said, man, I got to find this song. And the word says, this person's talking about says, "Oh Lord, your eyes set upon me, gently smiling. You have spoken my name. All I have longed for, I have found by the water. At your side, I will seek other shores."
Hmm.
And I just remember just weeping. Just when I read those words, it was like the tears from all the struggle of that past 7 years of trying to grow a church, and the stress of that was all of that just came rushing out through those tears. And I just kept hearing the voice of Jesus say, "That's come with me. We're going to go to other shores." And then the song goes on and says, "Lord, send me into a village or into a city, maybe to help some poor person, or to help someone who's lonely." And so it just opened this door. Like, don't get stuck on a place. Don't get stuck on a project. Don't turn those things into idols. Stay stuck on being open to God taking you where you're needed to be a blessing to other people. So I hope that's a word of encouragement for all those folks out there who are struggling with transition or change of any kind, as the three of us go through this together and encouraging each other. So thank you all for letting me share.
Yeah, that was
Perfect.
great. Thank you so much. And so, hanging on to our faith, hanging on to the hope, and just trusting God has a plan. Yeah. So, amen. It's great. Great conversation.
Thanks.
To infinity and beyond.
To
Yes.
infinity and beyond. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. And so you all stay tuned for what's coming with Black and White Let's Talk. We're making big plans to expand our program and to have more interesting and exciting guests on. So you all stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Take care, everybody.
Adios.
Bye now.
Drive away from here. Smile for what you know. Bittersweet to a brand new future. Eyes on the road. Don't carry burden to no one uses. Don't even measure the time. Clear page with worn out verses.